So this is what I'm going to be speaking on. What I intend doing is I'll speak for about an hour or a little less than an hour, and then we'll have a question answer session. I think it's important for us to discuss this issue and what follows from here. How are we going to address this uh, issue of India's dependence on China? I've put this uh, uh, in the title. I put interdependence, but as you'll see from my presentation, it's a long story about India's increasing dependence on China, and which many of us think has gone beyond reasonable limits, and I think something has to be done seriously to address this issue. Let me start from the context in which this whole issue came up very strongly. The issue of India's dependence on China. In fact, India's hostilities with China, and with in June, really triggered thinking in the policy-making circles in India about responding to the very large dependence we have on China. But in the beginning, it was a very knee-jerk reaction. There was a um, so there were demands for boycott of Chinese products, and several Chinese products, and you know very well about the Chinese apps that were banned in response to the political problem that we started having. But even before that, I think from at least from 2018, there has been frequent demands made by the Indian industry, several major sectors of the industry, especially textiles and clothing, about the overwhelming presence of Chinese products in Indian market, and the consequences that the Indian industry was suffering as a result of the Chinese presence. And what was becoming absolutely clear was that the Indian industry was not able to compete with the cheap Chinese products. So there were other issues also, which have mentioned in the slide. I'm not going to read that out. But all in all, you can see that there's a considerable amount of disquiet, if one can use a softer term, between the relationship relationship between these two neighbors, and is actually spilling over into a very large range of issues. Now, the key issues are the following, which I'll try and some of these I'll try and address directly, and others I'll leave for you to sort of intervene, and I'd like to hear from all of you what you think about this. The feasibility or practicality of boycotting these Chinese products altogether. Should we sort of completely decouple from China? And when we talk about this, we need to understand also the high level of India's reliance on imports from China in several critical areas, and I'll point that out in my presentation. What are the factors that contributed to this nature of India-China trade relations? And how did it happen? It didn't happen overnight. It happened over a long period of time. And finally, can India reduce its reliance on China, at least in the medium term? Are there ways in which India can actually do this? And again, I'm going to talk about some of the initiatives that the government of India has taken in the past several months towards and more. All of this clearly shows that there is an intent to decouple from China. So as I said, that China has an overwhelming presence in the Indian market, and all this didn't happen in a hurry, and this has been is slowly been building, and some of us have been pointing this out for a very long time, that China is actually spreading its tentacles very decisively in the Indian market, and the Indian policymakers need to look at it seriously. As I mentioned here, I'm going to show some of the numbers in the following slides. That it took China almost a decade and a half, slightly more than that now, to slowly but surely capture the Indian market in a broad range of products. In fact, it's pretty comprehensive, and all of us know from our own personal experiences. Almost everything that we look at, and all the gadgets and the other products. I mentioned textiles. A lot of the textiles comes from China. Some of this is not very obvious. That these are the products, the final products, or the intermediates actually come from China, and there is um, like I said, that it's cutting across all the sectors. So irrespective of the technological sophistication of the sector concerned, you have the Chinese products embedded in that. So the imports, like you see these numbers, and these are really tremendous. Like for instance, the increase, the share in imports increasing from less than 5% to over 16% in 17-18. That's where it sort of peaked. And of course, in the last two fiscals, it has declined. And in the current fiscal, and I'll show some numbers for the first 9 months or 9 months of this financial year, 2021, there has been a significant decline. Of course, in response to the trade measures that government has taken, and also, all this call for boycott of Chinese products, it has had some impact on trade flows between the two countries. Okay, now this is where you can see how this is the graph is actually. The graph shows what really happened between the trade relations between the two countries. From about level playing in the early 2000s, the Indian imports and exports from China were almost level playing, and then level pegging, and then they took off from about 3-4, especially from 4-5, and so you can see these two very clear patterns, that the imports actually expanded significantly, but the imports did not. They peaked in about 12-13, and they have actually declined. And we are expecting that exports will actually peak this year, given the trends in the first 9 months. So what is clearly evident is that while China has got access to Indian market, Indian products have not been able to penetrate into the Chinese market. And one other thing that I must tell you, that there have been a lot of talk about China using all kinds of trade barriers. Of course they do. That is without any doubt. But what is also important is that this kind of a trade pattern one sees with many of our major trading partners, especially the 3 partners with whom we have done free trade agreements. And these are ASEAN, Japan, and Korea. You see exactly the same pattern, sort of develop over the past decade since the free trade agreements have been implemented. And which is that, the imports from our trade partners have actually shot up. They've gone up significantly. while the imports have either stagnated or have fallen. They've even fallen in case of some countries. And so this tells a story, and that tells a story about the capability of Indian players, the Indian manufacturing sector in particular, to penetrate into these highly competitive markets, and that's one of the concerns that I'll reflect as I go along, and we need to find answers for this issue that I'm pointing out. I mentioned about the fact that in the first 9 months of this fiscal, there has been extent of change that we are seeing, and the change is on two fronts, as you can see from this graph. India's exports have actually increased, quite significantly. I would say this graph doesn't actually show it very well. It has actually gone up from, first 9 months last year, 1920. This was about $12 billion, and it's gone up to much higher than $15 billion now. So more than $3 billion increase in 9 months, which is significant given the kind of long-term trend that we have seen. And we are seeing imports dip again quite significantly from about $52 billion to now about $45 billion. So there is this kind of a tendency that we're seeing. So what is happening now is that we are closing our market to China, but some of our industries, especially iron and steel and others, they are finding their way into China, especially because China is using this sort of this period to really develop its own domestic economy. I think China itself is trying to decouple, and one of the studies that I did a few months back on this whole process of globalization and the future of this process of globalization, I was very the numbers. I knew that there has been a process of deglobalization that has set in from after the Great Recession of 2008. So it was very clear to everyone that countries were deglobalizing to an extent. But when I saw the numbers, I was absolutely surprised to see the extent to which deglobalization has taken place. And if you look at, if you consider trade to GDP ratio as one of the indicators of trade integration or economic integration, in case of China, trade to GDP ratio has fallen pretty steeply, so there is this particular process. Even in case of India, trade to GDP ratio has actually fallen for India as well. And I think for China, this process of falling trade to GDP ratio is going to get reinforced if China focuses on their domestic demand more than foreign demand. And again, this has been a demand which has been made since the recession of 2008, when US realized that its trade deficit was vis-a-vis China was really completely unacceptable, and many others did that. And then there was a sort of there was this argument being made that countries need to sort of decouple from the global economy, and of course, one of the things that would have happened as a consequence was decoupling from China as well. So this is a trend that we are seeing. So if you look at the bigger picture in terms of our economic relations with China, it is not as if we have cooled completely. There is a cooling off on the import side. We want to decouple from China on the import side, but not really on the export side, because on the export side, there is a greater tendency for at least some of the products in some of the areas to enter into China. And like I mentioned, iron and steel is one of the sectors that is seeing this. So this is something that I already said. I've mentioned already that we were level playing until 2003-4, and then the India's exports to China in the next sort of period that you see, and this is the period until the onset of the Great Recession, 2008. This was and if you recall that this was also the period in which Indian economy grew the fastest. As a period, we registered very high growth rates, and we also saw that trade with China expanded. Our exports expanded by about 11 billion, but imports expanded by $32 billion, and that sort of opened up the imbalance which continued thereafter. And then in the next sort of period that we are seeing between 2008-9 to 17-18. 17-18 is what I mentioned, that the Chinese imports from China actually peaked in that year. So here we are seeing that exports increased to 2000. They actually peaked in 2012-13, but then they fell sharply. If you look at in percentage terms, also it fell sharply until 2017-18, and we registered the highest trade deficit in 17-18, and which was a significant share of India's total merchandise trade deficit in that year. And again, the two fiscals, and this year, if we include this fiscal, then of course you'll find the same tendency working out. Exports have increased. Exports, as I said, are already 15 billion, so they could actually reach that 18 billion record level 2012-13 this year, and imports would decline. Will be significantly lower than the 65 billion that is been mentioned here. No, but it's actually foolhardy in the times that we live in to think that imports from China or imports of products originating China, let me put it that way, have actually fallen by the same kind of extent that these numbers are showing. One reason is that and this is something that again all of you are very familiar with. You would have also heard it in this particular program on the global value chains, the global and regional value chains, and that is that there is so much of slicing and dicing of these production chains that you really don't know what product originates where. It's very difficult to identify the origin of this product. But one thing which is absolutely clear is that in China uses some of the countries and some of these anthropods, which are basically these trading centers like Hong Kong and Singapore, to a very large extent to distribute its products in different regions of the world. Now, China is extremely aware of the political fallout of or the politics that its trade relations with other countries sort of underlines, and China therefore has worked out this fantastic sort of arrangement of using these centers for distribution of its products. So here I'm just looking at Hong Kong. Of course, with Hong Kong, China has always had a special relation, and over the past 2 years, you would have seen that China has now, clamping down on Hong Kong, although Hong Kong technically and otherwise remains a special administrative region of China, so it has a degree of autonomy. But increasingly, this autonomy, the autonomous space that Hong Kong has, is being curbed. And but this is the politics of it. But on the economic side, Hong Kong has long served as the gateway for distribution of Chinese products, and this is something that we have been talking about for a long time. And sort of the Hong Kong re-exports Chinese products that it imports from the mainland and distributes it in different parts of the world. And there are several motivations, and I just mentioned here this whole issue of tax avoidance, which has been focused quite a lot in the literature, of routing Chinese products through Hong Kong. So what happens when imports from Hong Kong are considered? So if you look at the long-term trends, you'll find that until 2019-20, imports from China have actually fallen, but that has not happened in case of Hong Kong. Hong Kong imports from Hong Kong have been more or less steady. There is a slight drop, but I think you find that in overall terms, imports from Hong Kong and China combined, they haven't actually dropped to the extent imports from China alone have dropped. So that's one point. And if I add countries like Singapore, which also do a similar thing in some of the very important products like electronics, then of course this graph is going to look even more different. So again, the short point that I'm making here is that we shouldn't delude ourselves by thinking that we have actually decoupled from China to the extent those numbers show. The reality is different from what we are looking at. So again, my point here is the following. What I put in the heading, that Hong Kong actually compensated for the decline in imports from China, and they did to a considerable extent. And so when the sentiments against India were it should be in India. Sorry, I'll correct it when I send it to you. The sentiments in India were against China following the Doklam dispute with India. Hong Kong was used to transship the mainland products. A couple of years in 2018, we had this skirmish in Doklam in Bhutan, that border. And so the point is that there is no real reduction in imports of products from the mainland, and that is something that we must recognize. I did a similar thing for the first 9 months of last 4 years, and here you do see there is a difference that we're seeing a dip in imports from Hong Kong and China put together, and that is also because when the government of India this time round was acting against China, it took measures both against Hong Kong, both against China and also against Hong Kong. For instance, they put in place certain restrictions on investments from China, but not just China, but also from Hong Kong. So I think there's finally this recognition in the policy making circles in India that you just can't block China and to get the desired results. If you want to decouple from China, you need to also look at Hong Kong, and I think that's something that government of India has now started doing. Now, what is the when you look at the products that India imports from China, when you look at a detailed view, and Professor Chalapati Rao and I did a paper some months back, looking at taking a very detailed, very kind of a granular view of what takes place behind the scene, what imports take place, and what are the sectors, and to what extent India is dependent. And I'm actually quoting from that paper. I think it will be circulated to you, or has been already circulated to you, and you can have a look. But so it actually covers a very wide range of products, and it's again, as I said, that all of us know it. All of us are experiencing in a daily life. But to mention it, it's something that when you mention it, then you see what kind of dependence we have, from nails, tacks to umbrellas and electronic products and pharmaceutical intermediates. This is a range of products, and these pharmaceutical ingredients I mentioned at the beginning. These are these active pharmaceutical ingredients, and by now, there's been so much of discussion in the media. By now, you know what these are. These are basically bulk drugs, which are the basic the basic raw material that is behind the drugs that we consume. So what the Indian companies do, the Indian generic manufacturers, they import these active pharmaceutical ingredients from China, and they sort of package it and get the right kind of doses, and they sell these products as formulations. So there are these two major products in the pharmaceutical sector. One is the formulations, other the bulk drugs or APIs, and bulk drugs are at the heart of any medicine that we are taking, and a large part of these APIs are actually coming from China. And as I said, that imports of these products are largely reliant on Chinese suppliers. So what concerns me most is that India's reliance in these two product groups, this very critical products group, telecom and electronic products, and APIs, is very, very significant, and that is a source of concern. Telecom and electronic products, quite apart from the fact that Government of India has a very elaborate Digital India mission, and they have this program. We are using telecom or all these electronic products in virtually every walk of life. Yeah, each one of us is going digital. Government is using these platforms on a very large range of applications, and all of us are aware that many of the Chinese products are not really innocent. They have embedded chips, and they have they can cause serious security breaches. So both and the other thing that I must mention here is that the rate at which these electronic products or intermediates, telecom products, this group of products, the rate at which imports of these products have been increasing in India. These products are set to become the largest category of imports in India's import basket, not to distant future. Because if the oil prices remain at this level, the kind of level that we have been seeing around $50-60, and importantly, if they don't go, they don't reach the $100 billion, $100 a barrel level anytime soon. If they remain $50-60 a barrel and don't exceed $100 billion barrel level anytime in the near future, then these telecom products will become the largest import items. And you can just imagine what it will do to the balance of payment situation there. Our merchandise exports, the merchandise trade balance is completely going to go haywire. And our total current account deficit will be huge, and it will be a major problem for India to address that problem. And pharmaceuticals, like I mentioned, that if electronics, import of electronics products is a concern that I have, and most of us should have because of security reasons. The second group of products, pharmaceuticals, of course, for our own health security, because again, we are aware that Chinese products often compromise quality. We have heard this, we have seen this in our country. We have heard this from different parts of the world, that these are not of the requisite sort of, they don't meet the global standards. Chinese companies, Chinese factories don't follow the international best practices in terms of in manufacturing, and therefore to import these products, these critical products for our health security from a country which really doesn't, has scant respect for global norms and standards, is really fraught with all kinds of problems. And we don't realize this, but I think we need to be aware of this. Now, I've given some numbers to just speak of the extent of dependence that we have. And this is in 1920. Mobile phones, on an average, more than 83% are imported from China. And here, look, I'm looking at only imports from China. I'm not including Hong Kong or Singapore for that matter. And if you do that, then you can see that these numbers will go up even more. Personal computers, then electronic integrated circuits, nearly 98%. Excuse me. And color TV sets. Government has taken steps to either restrict imports of Chinese products or try and encourage domestic producers in many of these products, especially in mobile phones. We are now talking about all these make in India and other incentives like the production linked incentive. We're trying to revive this sector, and colors TV sets where the imports were restricted. The imports from China were restricted to address this particular problem. But there are other products as well. Many of the white goods, they may not be coming. The completely built unit may not be coming from China, but the parts and components of everything that we use. You open a washing machine that you may be using or refrigerator, you'll find a whole bunch of Chinese products sitting there, Chinese components sitting there. So almost everything to do with electronics and these kinds of products have white goods, have a very large share of Chinese intermediates, or they're either made wholly in China or they are partially made in China. The pharmaceutical industry in India, again, you must have heard our colleagues talk about the pharmaceutical industry in this program. And now by now that this is pharmaceutical industry is doing very well. In fact, if you consider this whole 3 decades of global integration, this whole process of liberalization and globalization in India, if you have to put your finger on one sector which has been doing tremendously well in terms of global competition, it is this pharmaceutical industry. Of course, auto industry has also been doing very well, but it's not as globally competitive as pharmaceutical industry is. And this industry has been providing affordable medicines to both developed and developing countries. And even now, as we speak, you must have heard about Indian companies supplying vaccines to a very large number of countries. I've actually been looking at India's vaccine policy, and if anyone is interested, I can always share something that I've just recently written on this issue. And if you look at the individual companies, the major companies, pharmaceutical companies like Dr. Reddy's and Sun Pharma and some of these leading companies in India, and if you look at their exports to sales ratio, that means how much of their sales they're exporting, well above 50% of their sales is actually in the international market, and it's a very we have a very strong presence there. But however, like I mentioned, that the industry depends on China to meet these requirements for APIs. So So the question that must be asked is that, what is the point of being a global leader in supplying pharmaceuticals when you're sitting on such a weak base? Because any major disruptions in the supply chains, or suppose tomorrow China, for some reason, China can also retaliate. If China retaliates and then picks up the pharmaceutical industry as the sector in which it wants to retaliate, then the Indian pharma industry is going to be in a complete soup. So there's no possibility of any bailout from there. So the API imports, like I mentioned, you can see this, that China's share has gone up consistently, and last year, 1920, almost 2/3 of what the total imports of APIs are actually from China. And this is indeed very, very disconcerting, and it's very, 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 very disturbing. Now, I'm not going to just show, read out the whole thing, but you can see it later. That some of the critical, or products like antibiotics, or even something that we pop in at a drop of a hat, paracetamol, this Crocin and Calpol and all. This is something that we keep popping in the moment we feel a little feverish. We just pop in. You just see the extent of imports from China and the share of China in total imports. Paracetamol, whatever we import, we are actually importing from China. A vaccine for Japanese encephalitis, it's an extremely problematic thing in Eastern UP, Bihar, and then we have a whole lot of antibiotics where the dependence is well above 90%. So I just gave you this, showed you this slide to emphasize the point that I've been making. That in critical pharmaceutical, in critical active, in critical therapeutic areas, critical for addressing critical diseases, the basic ingredient is actually coming from China, and that is the big problem. Again, if you move away from pharmaceuticals and look at other areas, tunneling machinery. We have all these metro projects going on in different parts of the country, and it's a big project that's going on. China is supplying 96.4% of the tunneling machinery that is being used here. Umbrellas, 93%. Nails and tacks, like I mentioned at the beginning, 90%. So polyester fabric, which viscose yarn, 94%, and so you can see that it's just not this one, not just pharmaceuticals, but across the board, like I mentioned, I'd say showing to the numbers, and solar lanterns and lamps, and we are moving towards a more environmentally friendly sort of regime. 92%, 93% of the solar lanterns are coming from China. So literally, we are being compressors used in refrigeration equipment, 73%. Now, surely, Indian industry can do better than that. I think it's not really a very happy state of affairs that we find ourselves in. Now, if you look at the technology content of India's manufactured imports from China, you find that the most of it is either high tech or medium tech, and these are obvious because a lot of these intermediates for high tech and medium tech industries, are coming from China, and so these are the percentage of total imports. But if you look at the technology content of India's manufactured exports from China to China, it should be two. Sorry, I've made a lot of mistakes here. To China, then the largest component of our exports is actually resource based. So we are exporting a lot of resource based products, and we are importing technology-based products. So there is a serious problem in the sense that, and this also shows, I think, it also shows that we are actually exporting a lot of value addition from our country onto China. So China is taking advantage of this. China, one example I'll give you is interesting, and it's of recent origin. Reliance exports a lot of the, the the raw material that is required for polyester yarn or all these synthetic yarn. These are called aromatics. This from the Jamnagar and the Patal Ganga projects, and they have been expanded in the last few years. And Reliance has been exporting these raw materials to China. And now, what are we importing? We are importing synthetic yarn, like I showed you in the previous slide. So what is happening is that, I wrote somewhere and a couple of years back that if you again look at the India-China trade pattern closely, it almost resembles like a colonial pattern of trade. You remember that in the colonial period, Britain used to take a lot of raw materials from India. Cotton yarn, cotton was imported by Britain, and cotton yarn and all those stuff was exported from their mills in Lancashire and other places. So almost a similar pattern is happening here. We are exporting raw materials and intermediate sort of low value intermediates, and importing all these high value products from China. So this is what I mentioned here in this slide, that if you look at the summary of this, high and medium technology products is what we dominate imports. Low technology products, only 12% of manufactured products imported from China, and China's imports to China is nearly 60% resource based, and shares of high and medium medium technology were only 7 and 23%. So this is what, so exports were mostly raw material and low value intermediates. I'm sure I mentioned this. And China is largely finished products and critical intermediates, and most of them are actually high value intermediates. So it's not just just in terms of the trade numbers that we see the imbalance. We see a serious imbalance in terms of the value addition that we if you actually think in terms of trade in value added products, then you find this imbalance actually going up even even higher than what just mere trade numbers show. So why did this thing happen? How did China manage to expand so much into India's market? And my argument is that there are two mutually reinforcing set of developments that contributed to this kind of phenomenon. The first was India's fast-track trade liberalization during the early 2000s, especially between 2003 and 2008. Many of us who've been working on the Indian economy have been commenting on the liberalization, this whole process of global integration. We take, and we date 1991 as the year from which liberalization just took off. Now, we are not quite correct when we look at 91 as a period of global integration. Well, first instance, tariffs did come down in 1 year from 90 to 91. They actually did drop, but after that, tariffs remain more or less stagnant. And like you can see here, that average industrial tariffs and import tariffs were even industrial products were 33%. The agricultural tariffs were even higher, but the average tariffs was for India, both agriculture and industry put together, was in the range of 40% even in 2000, and which is fairly high. And industrial products where liberalization mostly took place. In agriculture, we haven't still seen the kind of liberalization for very obvious reasons. Maybe someday we can talk about it. But for industrial products, the tariffs were just pulled down from 33% to below 9% in 2008. So there was a steep decline, and there are many factors. Of course, India's autonomous liberalization really took off at that period. In fact, in 1997, when Mr. Chidambaram was the finance minister, he had spoken of bringing India's tariffs down to the levels seen in the ASEAN countries by, in quick time. Of course, he couldn't do that in the little window that he had as a finance minister then. But when he became the finance minister again in 2004, he actually implemented what he had talked about in 1997. So he brought it down to close to what the ASEAN countries, with among the more open economies in that period. The second factor that happened was the India's joining the Information Technology Agreement from 2000, and by 2005, almost all these electronic products, information technology related, and very wide range of products, they all were brought down to the zero tariff level, and then India removed its quantitative restrictions, the quotas and others restrictions on imports in 2001. So a combination of all these factors brought in liberalization, and a fast-paced liberalization. And then the second major factor was that while we liberalized, we did not make any efforts to make the manufacturing sector face the challenges of the open economy. And here I have must mention that trade policy making in India just followed a very conventional kind of the Washington consensus line, which says that all that you've got to do to succeed in an open economy framework is just to bring down tariffs and remove the distortion caused by the tariffs, and everything else will be set right. Once you get the prices right, everything is going to be set right. Now that has not happened anywhere in the world. Not a single country has succeeded in just opening up the market and ensured that their domestic players just become globally competitive. Again, if there is another occasion, I can talk about that. This whole thing about distortions is so short-sighted, because the distortions are there in every single market, and the distortions don't come merely from tariffs. Tariffs is a very small part. There are all kinds of other factors that are causing distortions, and they're hurting the market, but no one really talks about them. So only those countries have succeeded who have just taken very specific and focused measures to make their manufacturing sector compete with the global best in an open economy framework, and I'll come to that in just a moment. And so while India just did this, India never looked after its industry and just opened up. And on the other hand, on the other side was China, which had become a member of the WTO in 2002, and after it joined the WTO, India it got the benefit of most favored nation treatment from India, which is that all countries, India was treating all the members of the WTO as equal, offering similar kind of tariff concessions. And China, this is what the Chinese needed. So they need an open market in India after they joined the WTO, and they just started expanding in India. So we did exactly what the Chinese wanted to, just drop tariffs when they were best prepared. They'd already worked out their they've already got their industries into the kind of shape. They already become the factory of the world, and here they found just below, just under their nose, they found a big market, then they started expanding. So I mentioned here that, so what I actually lay the blame on is an ill-conceived tariff liberalization policy, which was really not desirable at that point. We shouldn't have done it at that kind of a pace. We are comparing ourselves with ASEAN, but not doing what the ASEAN was doing. And this is what I mentioned here, that ASEAN countries had adopted a well-honed set of industrial policies, enabling their industries to not only face import competition in their increasingly open economies, but also become globally competitive. Now, that's the thing, that you have to make your entities globally competitive, but no one really thought of it in India. We just went on liberalizing, and this textbook thing never works. And I keep telling my students also that I think one thing you need to understand is that what is this universe of distortions, and how do they work out, and what are the policy interventions you need to actually address the distortions. You shouldn't take a very narrow view that World Bank and IMF have been telling us. So what is required? What was required? What was required is that we needed to revive the manufacturing sector. And it's not as if the government of India never really thought of anything, but nothing came out of it. So this is a laundry list of what the government of India did in terms of it. It started in 2006. The National Manufacturing Competitiveness Council talked about reviving the manufacturing sector from 17% to 23% in a decade. And as we speak today, the share of manufacturing sector hasn't actually gone up beyond 17%. It's still hovering around sort of bordering 16, 17%. And then UPA2 launched the National Manufacturing Policy, and then this Make in India policy was launched. Now, my point is, again, I don't have much time. Maybe we'll just discuss it if anyone is interested in this issue. And my point is that this was the core of, should have been the core of India's, policy of global integration. You look at how manufacturing sector, for that matter, the entire real sector, even agriculture. Agriculture is horribly uncompetitive. So manufacturing sector, and then try to improve their competitiveness, bring them up to speed with the global players, and then try and look at what you want to do, or have a parallel process. So you have a gradual phase of opening up and also strengthening the domestic market, the domestic players, and that was the way to go, but we did not. Now again, I'll tell something that is very obvious, and again something that I speak whenever I speak on this issue, I mention this. Now, what do we do in our homes, as a family, when we are bringing up our children? What do we tell our children? We tell our children, you prepare yourself. You give them all kinds of incentives and all kinds of do all kinds of hand holding to prepare them so that they can go out and compete in the wide open world. We don't actually throw them there and say, no, I'm going throwing you in competition, and you swim and do something and you become competitive. That never happens. Do we do in our families? We don't. So why doesn't the government do that? Why doesn't the government actually do the same thing when it's talking to all these different sections of the industry or the agriculture? And why doesn't it listen to these people, what they want the government to do in order for them to become more competitive? And I think there's and for years I've actually been a part of this policy making thing. I used to keep telling them that, look, the one lesson that you must learn from the East Asian experience of Japan, Korea, and others is that these countries have actually, in these countries, the government has been a facilitator. The government has heard the manufacturing or all these businesses and responded to the needs of the businesses. Of course, there was a carrot and stick policy that the government would say, that what is it that you need from us? We'll provide you, but then within a finite period, you got to become globally competitive. They did this to the in Korea. This was done with the automobile industry. In the early 80s, automobile industry, all these players were brought in by the MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, and they were told that, look, in this period, within this finite period, you got to become globally competitive. You tell me what is required, we'll provide you everything, but this is something that you must realize. And what do you have? You have a globally competitive and one of the leaders in automobile industry. Korea has become one of the leaders in automobile industry today. So that is the thing that is required to be done, but still we are not on that path. So all this, so all these things look very distant. The share of manufacturing has remained between 15 and 17%, and they have actually the initiatives lack a critical element, which is a well-designed industrial policy. And government has been telling us several times. We have talked to them. They've been saying that we are working on an industrial policy for the past 4 years. It'll be the 5th year that they're working on it. Nothing has come on this. So what is the possible way forward? And this is the last slide that I have, that we need pragmatic strategies that can revive India's manufacturing sector and reduce our reliance on China. I would say dependence on China. Adoption of an industrial policy would really help. I'm sure someone would have talked about this with you. And from my side, what does this entail? If you look at the bricks, the nuts and bolts of it, it's an enabling environment focused on providing physical and human infrastructure necessary to improve competitiveness. That is the first. The second is that you need an innovation system that can anticipate the future needs of the industry. And the third is development finance, especially focused on the needs of the micro, and I would emphasize micro, small and medium enterprises. Because today the micro enterprise doesn't get any institutional support, and they don't get institutional credit. They don't qualify in many cases. Then I would emphasize on a proactive government that can also identify market failures and can take steps to address them. This is a topic for a entirely sort of fresh kind of presentation, but I don't have the time to do that. But the point that I would make here is that government must not hesitate to support public sector enterprises in all such cases. And why do I say this? Why do this? And I would refer you to a whole host of new literature which is there on the way in which the public sector has been, is steadily being revived in the Western countries. For your reference, a ready reference, you must look at that IMF's publication called Fiscal Monitor of April 2020, where they talked about two things. One is in response to COVID, of course, the COVID pandemic, the COVID-induced crisis. One is, of course, to use fiscal policy to the maximum extent possible, which is again proactive government. And the second is that they show how public, state-owned enterprises, the public sector enterprises in different countries have come up very strongly, and they came in response to the 2008 financial crisis. So this is very important, and unfortunately, here we are seeing government move in a different direction. They want to actually sell the private public sector enterprises. I at least as an economist, I don't see what sense it makes to do this. And the third, then is the fact that the trade liberalization must be undertaken only when at least some entities can benefit. That is very important. There is no point saying trade liberalization benefits. I've actually, as a policymaker myself, I've challenged those who came and told me that, you go and actually liberalize. I said, look, you tell me which sector liberalizes. Show me first. Then I'll actually believe what you're saying. But otherwise, I will not, because I don't think we are prepared for this. And India's current approach to enter into free trade agreements really lacks this vision. I'm very sorry to say this. And finally, I leave this as a question to all of you. All of you must have read about this Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Now, where does it sit in this mix? Do you think it has anything can contribute really? And of course, the important step that the government has taken through this production linked incentive. May not have time to discuss this today, but please read the documents carefully. And something that I also tell in my class, I'm going to urge you to do that. Please read the original documents and see what is the intention and what are the things that are said in that document, and then come to a conclusion. Because there are all kinds of so-called policy analysts, commentators who write all kinds of things depending on what they are trying to sell to all of us. And I think I can tell you very confidently that more than 50% is all they're talking about to make believe. The government never talked about all those things in their document. Government talks about something very different. So I'll end here, and finally I would say that this virtual presentations are pretty boring. I must say that if you had sat face to face, then I could have seen how much you're able to grasp, and I would have actually repeated some of the points that I was making. But unfortunately, that's not the luxury that we have today. I'll be delighted if there are some questions asked, and I'll be happy to respond to the extent I can. Finally, thank you very much for your patience and your attention.